Welcome to today's Explainer. We're about to dive into a literal masterclass on the invisible rules that hold our entire society together. We've pulled directly from high-level Osmania University legal theory exams to really decode the absolute foundations of jurisprudence. And honestly, we aren't just looking at what the law is, but the incredibly fascinating philosophy behind why it even exists in the first place.
But before we get too deep into the theory, I want to pose a highly practical question to you. What is the actual difference between possessing something and owning it? I mean, it sounds like a simple riddle, doesn't it? But to truly answer this and to understand how courts resolve massive conflicts over property every single day, we've got to first understand the grand philosophy of law itself.
All right, so here is our agenda for today. We're looking at 4 key areas. First, the eye of law. Second, law as social engineering. Third, ownership versus possession. And finally, number 4, the power of precedent. Let's get into it. Starting right at the top with Section 1, the eye of law, where we'll look at the philosophy of positive law. Now, jurisprudence is a big, heavy word, right? But what's fascinating is its origin. It comes from the Latin juris, meaning law, and prudentia, which means knowledge or wisdom. Put them together, and it's literally the science, or the philosophy, of law. According to the legal philosopher John Austin, this is the philosophy of positive law. It doesn't just stop at asking, what's the speed limit? It zooms way out to answer fundamental, heavy-hitting questions like, what is justice? And why do people obey the law at all? Because jurisprudence is absolutely not just a rigid set of rules. It's a theoretical study, it's a philosophical inquiry, and crucially, it's a social science that regulates human behavior. It looks at law as this living instrument for maintaining order, justice, and social welfare, analyzing the whole shebang from our basic legal rights and duties to how justice is actually administered in the real world. Which perfectly aligns with a really powerful concept. Jurisprudence is the eye of law. I absolutely love this framing. Jurisprudence provides the vision. It builds that critical thinking muscle among lawyers and judges, helping the entire legal system interpret rules, and most importantly, adapt them to changing social conditions. It keeps the law from just being a blind, mechanical collection of technical rules. Which brings us nicely to Section 2, Law as Social Engineering. We're diving into the Sociological school of jurisprudence. So this particular school of thought emerged as a direct rebellion against those super rigid, formal legal theories of the past. It argues that law simply must be studied in relation to what society actually needs. The leading voice here was Roscoe Pound, who famously declared, "Law is a tool of social engineering." To really wrap our heads around what Pound meant, I want you to picture society as a massive, complex machine. Just like a mechanical engineer arranges all the different gears and belts for efficient functioning, the lawyer, or the legal system itself, is the social engineer. The law's main job is to organize all the competing interests in society so that the whole machine runs smoothly without just completely breaking down. It takes this highly abstract social science and makes it incredibly visual and tangible. So what exactly are these moving parts of the machine? What are we balancing? Well, first, we have individual interests. Things like your personal freedom, your family, your property rights. Second, you've got public interests, which involves state security and administration. And third, social interests, which cover the big stuff like public health, morality, and general social welfare. The entire goal of social engineering is to balance these 3 tiers so that society can actually function in harmony. Of course, every big philosophical idea has its tensions, right? The merits of this sociological school are pretty clear. It makes the law practical, it actively promotes social justice, and it adapts to our changing world. But the major criticism is that if you put too much emphasis on broad social welfare, you might inadvertently chip away at individual liberty. Plus, let's be real, in practice, it is incredibly difficult to balance all these competing interests equally. The law is literally always walking a tightrope.
Okay, let's zoom in from the societal level to the personal for Section 3, ownership versus possession. This is all about the difference between having a right and having control.
Remember that riddle I asked you at the very beginning of this explainer? Well, here's where we break it down. Ownership is the ultimate legal right over property, the right to use it, transfer it, or even destroy it. It's permanent and strictly recognized by law. Possession, on the flip side, is merely factual physical control. It might just be temporary. So the absolutely crucial distinction here is that an owner might not actually possess their property, and a possessor might not own it.
To put that into perspective, let's look at a super relatable example right out of the source text. A landlord owns a house, but a tenant possesses it, right? The landlord holds the ultimate legal title, the ownership,
but the tenant is the one with the actual, everyday physical control of the possession.
But legally speaking, possession isn't just about casually holding on to something. It actually requires two very distinct elements. Step 1 is corpus possessionis, which is the actual physical control over an object. And step 2 is animus possidendi, the intention to exercise that control. Now, you might be wondering, why does the law even care about mere physical control if it isn't true ownership? Well, it's simple. Maintaining peace and public order requires the law to protect actual physical control. Otherwise, people could just go around taking things by force, and we'd have total chaos.
Moving into our final stop, Section 4, the power of precedent. Let's look at how judges actually use past decisions. If you've ever paid attention to a high-profile court case, you know the entire doctrine of judicial precedent is built on something called stare decisis. It's a Latin term that literally means to stand by decided cases. Basically, when a court decides a legal issue, lower courts generally have to follow that established principle in similar future cases. This is a massive primary source of law in many systems around the world.
But here's the catch. Not all past decisions carry the exact same weight. We have authoritative precedents, which are strictly binding. A lower court absolutely must follow them, no questions asked. Then, on the other side, we have persuasive precedents. These aren't legally binding, but a judge might choose to follow them anyway, maybe because they're just highly logical, or they come from a really well-respected jurisdiction.
So, what's the actual ripple effect of running a legal system this way? Well, the advantages are great. It gives us certainty, uniformity, predictability, and equality before the law. You want the rules to be consistent, for sure. But the disadvantages? They're just as stark. Relying too heavily on precedent is a double-edged sword. It risks making the law incredibly rigid, and worse, it can artificially preserve these outdated, anachronistic principles way past their expiration date. And that brings us full circle to the real takeaway of this entire masterclass. Rote memorization of rules, it's never enough. True legal wisdom happens when you can explain the philosophy, the underlying purpose, the criticisms, and the everyday practical relevance of a concept. That right there is what separates just knowing a rule from truly, deeply understanding the law. Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question straight from our source material. Now that you've seen the actual machinery underneath it all, from social engineering to the tricky balance of ownership and the sheer weight of precedent, I want you to ask yourself, does our law genuinely serve justice, or is it really just a collection of technical rules? Keep that in the back of your mind the next time you think about the invisible forces governing our world. Thanks so much for joining me for today's Explainer.